Hi, everyone. Welcome to the sixth episode of the Rubicon podcast. I know we've been gone for a while, but we're back now and are going to be pretty consistent. Today, we're going to talk about reasoning models. Feels like there's a lot that's happened there. Stargate and all the money that the hyperscalers are spending and are planning to spend in the coming years. And then we're also going to talk about Cursor and all the other coding agents. So, Govind, do you want to get us started by talking more about reasoning models? It feels like Grok 3 and the O series of models that OpenAI has come out with has been a pretty exciting development.
I think the core premise is that you can throw more compute. Like, there's this graph that Jensen put up, which is you've got like pre-training scaling laws, and then you've got post-training scaling laws. Then now you've got inference time compute, like test time compute scaling laws, right? And the thought process is like all of these sort of start to stack on top of each other, and and like you will increasingly find like it is much easier. Actually, I think like the biggest takeaway from all this is that a lot more compute is going to be spent on inference, right, at the core.
Yeah,
And like even if you don't necessarily now there's all these papers, people are saying, okay, we took a 1B model and using test time compute, we scaled it to beat a 400B model at math or whatever, right? And like I think basically the interesting bit here is that um, you can let models think for a long time, and if you can keep them reliably on track, you can let them naturally do chain of thought and keep doing chain of thought until they come to the right answer.
yeah. And I feel like one of the very interesting things that it almost feels like these reasoning models are going to open up the aperture for all of the applications that felt like AI wasn't able to solve, like you mentioned, math and coding, and it's going to get a lot better at that. And also along with that, it's just going to get better at all the knowledge work that it feels like people want to do. And I think like deep research is probably like the best example of that, which is, I mean, we do lots of financial analysis and I think lots of other people do, and it's like, hey, just if you just put anything in deep research, it just comes out with, if you're looking at, I mean, let's say you're talking about some disease and you want to look into that, it feels like deep research gives you this really strong background to help just like understand that, and gives you like just a ton of information that along with sources, and it has reasoned well on top of it. So can you talk about just what you've seen in terms of the incremental capabilities that the reasoning models unlock?
I think I think okay, I think there's some things that they're worse at now, right? Like reasoning models are slightly worse at instruction following because they end up getting distracted in the process. The way sort of if you like let a human think for a long time and you ask them, wait, what's the original question you're thinking about, it's very easy to get distracted. I think reasoning models, I think the interesting debate about reasoning models, so like that it is like yet again an example of the bitter lesson, right? Which is that uh, like over time, if you give the model like we as humans have this tendency to try to encode structure into the way we solve problems, right? And like even before, much before all these test time compute these reasoning models came out, there were, you had chain of thought, tree of thought, and all these things, and that was all like humans prompting the model. Before you come up with an answer, think about three possible ways that you could tackle this, and then blah 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 blah. And you were like you were basically coming up with all these heuristics and trying to impose structure upon the way you the LLM tackled the problem. And I think the interesting bit about reasoning models is that they have naturally emergently learned their own structure for doing this, and you can let them keep thinking, right? And so the applications of this, I mean, I think one, I am, even though they are worse at instruction following, I am bullish on uh on 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 humans that like my core thesis has been, at least for the last year or so, that like the reason we don't have real agents in production yet, it is not because uh, the models aren't good enough, as a lot of people like to believe. It is like more of an issue of reliable elicitation of models capabilities. Like 1% of the time it gets it right, the rest of the time it can't, right? And why? And I think that's mostly because humans are just not that great at prompting, and the way humans think about these problems is also not that great, and there's this like divide, like this communication gap at the core. And I think reasoning models makes it so you can do even less prompting and the model will still be able to figure out what you're doing. It's much better at interpreting sort of intent, right? And so I think deep research is a great example of an application. I think code generation, I think from what we found like DeepSeek R1 is like is like non-trivially better at, like, I think you also have to change the way you talk to these models, as in like the cursor guys, which we'll talk about later. The cursor guys made R1 available for use in cursor with their existing scaffolding, and they still found that they prefer 3.5 sonnet to uh, R1, right? And it's like, why? I think that's mostly a scaffolding issue, because I've used it in other contexts where I just sort of give it all basically. I think reasoning models are useful because you can give them a lot more context, and they can sort of figure out what's relevant and what's not, in ways that like traditional LLMs sort of can easily get confused by, right? Because uh, yeah, so that's one thing. I think there's
Yeah,
another sense which, like, there's this like artificial divide that people are drawing between reasoning models and not reasoning models, right? And like 3.5 sonnet, for instance, is in fact a reasoning model. Like before it gives you an answer, if you can go, if you go use Claude.ai, you can see that it does a little thinking. It says
yeah,
it's pondering. It literally is,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
it does do some thinking before it gives you an answer. So in
yeah,
some sense, they are also reasoning models. And I like this thing that Dario says about reasoning, which is like, we're not going to have like reasoning models and not reasoning models. We're just going to have models
yeah,
that when they need to, they can think, and when they
yeah,
don't, they don't, right? And I think that's what Sam and OpenAI, everyone's moving towards too, right?
yeah. And I think one of the underappreciated facts is that, or I guess applications, is that we have these really complex problems that, guess what? It's going to take, let's say it takes any analyst a month or 2 months, 3 months to go research something. Why don't we just have these models effectively think for a day, a week? And I think like we're going to have these really complex problems that people are going to spend lots of money on to say, hey, I don't want this model to think for 10 minutes, 30 minutes. I want it to think for a full week. Just go, pretty much go look at every data point you can and reason as much as you can, spend as much compute, and see what the answer comes out with. And I think that is what I've heard some people talk about, which is like how complicated these tasks can get. And rather than employing 10 different people, why don't we just give DeepSeek R1 or O3 a week to think and spend all the compute you want on it?
Yeah, and I'm. This is again. This is the other thing. Is like we're all very early. Like all
Yeah,
of this is very early, right?
yeah,
Like even like pre-training is barely understood, and pre-training is like, like not that many. It's like, or like 6 years old or something, right? Like post-training even less. Inference time compute, like, it's like in like born yesterday, right? So
yeah,
very excited to see what people do. I do think you will see an explosion of agents. I hope. I hope.
yeah, yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So, and I think this is a great segue to talk also about DeepSeek and the distillation that they did from the, or at least people have claimed that they distilled from all of the OpenAI models and the all of the pretty much all of the outputs that they have. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you think about distillation going forward? Given DeepSeek has sort of proved that if you put your best model out there, people can take the outputs and then generate a much better model for at least what they're claiming, just a vastly cheaper and similar model.
I think. See, I think a lot of these fears is like in some sense overblown, because in practice, like even if you don't necessarily go out of your way to go sample from OpenAI, if you just go train on web scale data today, you are going to find a lot of OpenAI outputs in the data. And if you a lot of companies, most people don't spend as much time looking at the data as they should and filtering out data as they should, right? And so if you do like at least in the past, up until like maybe the most recent Gemini iteration, you asked it, who are you? Like half the time, I'll just tell you I'm like ChatGPT 3 or something,
Yeah.
right? And like, and I think now actually they've just like added a prompt that says, you are Gemini, right?
It doesn't tell you it's ChatGPT because DeepSeek did that in the first couple, like in the first couple of days when it got really popular. It said it was ChatGPT.
Yeah, right. So and people have been doing distillation for a while, right? Like there was for the longest time there were these rumors, beliefs, hypotheses that like Sonnet was distilled from Opus, and I think Haiku actually is distilled from Opus. But what we found out in the aftermath of this DeepSeek thing is that when this Dario wrote a post, he was like, we actually only spent like a few tens of millions of dollars training Sonnet from scratch, right? Which is like not distillation. So like it's unclear. There's like special magic around Sonnet that, for context, like, people, it's like it's unclear what they did that's special that makes it such, that gives it such an interesting personality. But back to distillation. I think like I think even like a year ago there was this thing like ByteDance was like distilling from OpenAI's API, right? And this is like the other concern about, like, if you do want to put out, like, if you do want to make reasoning models accessible to people, and you want to make it accessible to the point that, you give, if like you and I get access to an O3 that can think for a week, right? Imagine, like, that's that expensive, first of all, right? So there's this concern that, after a point, if you, the only people who can afford to run O3 for a week are your competitors, right? So there's this reason, like, why do you not put out your best model all the time, because of that concern, right? But yeah, I think everyone's doing distillation of various kinds, right? Like, I don't think OpenAI is like distilling from anyone else necessarily, uh, but
But that's also because they also have the leading
they
model. I
have
think
the leading
I,
model
I
and
do
stuff.
think that, I mean, if you
Yeah,
look at Grok 3, I don't think they had O3 in the benchmarks where they were talking about reasoning, but I do think that what it looks like, at least for now, is like O3 is the best reasoning model out there.
yeah.
So it's hard to, it's when you're on the frontier, it's hard to distill from other people, I'm assuming.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, I think, in practice, I think it's like it's gonna keep happening. People are gonna keep distilling, and I don't think it'll like. It's like, I think it's like a cheap shortcut that you can use once or twice, but after a point, you just like, you do need like really good pre-training data, and
Yeah.
you do need to like get your post-training like like system figured out, et cetera, et cetera. Like, like, you're not gonna be able to build a frontier lab like a year from now. Uh, by just distilling from OpenAI models.
Yeah. I agree with you, but I think it also brings back the point, which is I think with Grok 3 releasing and even OpenAI coming out with all these models and trying to be, at least what it seems like, is more transparent. I think it's abundantly clear that the model layer is going to be commoditized, and and so much value is going to be captured on the application layer. Not to say that that is not a lot of value. I mean, OpenAI is rumored to raise at what, 300 plus $1 billion, but I do think we've seen the break where OpenAI, XAI, Anthropic, and probably a handful of other hyperscalers are going to just run away with these models. And probably, and like what we've seen also is that, I mean, for OpenAI, Anthropic, this is the core business. But when you think about the hyperscalers, they're really using this as one. I mean, Google's effectively using this for their own use for Google search. But then when you go and look at, for example, Alibaba, they're effectively using Quen as like a cross-selling tool. Like they talk about this, which is, hey, Quen is awesome because the best implementation of Quen, the easiest one, is on the cloud, and our
Yeah,
cloud business effectively just grows faster. So what it seems like is that everybody has different motivations of why they want to build the frontier model out there, but it just feels like that just makes the model more and more commoditized, as people try to be on the frontier, and the application layer, everybody's building on the application layer, effectively ends up being the core beneficiary of
yeah.
that without doing effectively anything.
And like, on that note, I think the other interesting bit about distillation that I forgot to mention is, I mean, you talk to Sam, and you ask him, like, can I train other models on OpenAI outputs? He'll say yes, like, in the sense of, can I train a smaller, like, I don't need all the power of like this 100 billion parameter model for most use cases, right? It's like I can run an 8B and it's just fine. And I think even OpenAI is moving towards that direction. Like, I think if you go to their API platform, you will find that they give you a way to distill from like 4.0 to 4.0 mini, as in generate a bunch of outputs with 4.0 and then fine tune on that 4.0 mini. And like, a lot of our thesis is that, like, distillation is increasingly, there's like a couple ways you can do distillation, but, even just like brute force sort of coarse distillation, the way they allow you to do it, is like increasingly the way that you go about building models you can actually deploy, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I guess here's the broader kind of capex question, because what it seems like is that everybody's going to spend 50, 75, $100 billion each in 2025, which I think I think a lot of people have gotten very accustomed to large numbers, but I think this is like an ungodly amount of money. I don't think people like very much understand how much money this is, but when it comes, so I think the interesting question is, first of all, would love to know your thoughts. What do you think about the large capex numbers, and then why even after DeepSeek and, I mean, pretty much like you mentioned, other labs coming out and saying, hey, it's only going to take us tens of millions of dollars to train these models, why companies are not taking down how much they're going to spend?
I mean, I think it's a lot of money. I think if you're gonna spend that much on, I I think for all of these guys, it's just like a question of, if I don't spend the money, there's a good chance that I am not the one. Like, if like, this is the thing that Zach is always talking about, right? It's like, if we don't it's possible that we're overspending, but it doesn't matter, because this is like the dominant platform shift of the
Yeah,
decade. Of the era, right? And if you miss out on this one because you're too lazy or too slow to train good models, right? Because you just didn't build out enough data centers, then
yeah,
you dropped the ball, right?
yeah,
So I do think there's this, like, there has been this ROI question for a while, but I think you're starting to, and I think that's not helped by the fact that, like, the applications that people are really interacting with are ChatGPT, and then, like, various flavors of ChatGPT clones. Microsoft Copilot is probably one of the other, like, first interactions with AI that people have, and it's, right, not that great of a product, right? But I do think, like, you are going to see, like, this explosion of vertical agents, and I think reasoning models give you more of an excuse to spend that much on compute, because maybe you crack the Riemann hypothesis by letting it think forever, right?
yeah,
But, like, it's unlikely that I think that it's like, I don't expect to see capex go down by like 50% or something at any of the next 2 years. I
yeah.
think people are
No,
going to spend more.
I agree. I think, and like, I think the way I think about it is like there are two different categories. One is the cloud providers who effectively just have to build out
Okay.
infrastructure
Yep. Yep. Yep.
because, like, I mean, if you listen to Satya's recent interview with Dwarkesh, like, there is all of these conversations about inference, and pretty much everybody's talking about how, I think Alibaba came out and said, like, majority of customers are all inference, the net new customers on the cloud business. So it's okay, if you're a cloud provider, in order to grow, you have to just build out more and more infrastructure. And you got to, and also for context, when it comes to inference, it's, you effectively have to build it out closer to wherever you are doing the inference. Like, you can't serve people in India with a data center in the US. Like,
Yeah.
that inference just doesn't work. So effectively, what it sounds like is that a lot of the capex is just going to go into land power in terms of starting out all these projects that are going to build these data centers. And then there is the capex, which is, I think, for like the Googles of the world and OpenAIs of the world, where it's like, hey, this is the core business. And like you mentioned, like Zuck, if they can get return on ad spend just incrementally higher, that's effectively billions of dollars that they can generate more in the business. Because guess what? Like, over the course of all these, I mean, years, they've effectively squeezed out every margin point that they can. Now they finally found a lever which is incrementally better that wasn't there before. So I completely agree with you. I think it's partially that, if not AI, where do you go spend money? Also, I was listening to the All In part, and part of the conversation about Stripe being private was also about, do do you believe that the Stripe CEOs know what is best about the business and they will have a better time interacting with private investors, or would they rather go spend time with some random public investor who knows very little about the business and go spend time like convincing them why the money they're spending is a great idea? And I mean, it's very much like the founder mode discussion, which is the founder knows best, the CEO knows best, they should power through a lot of these like quarterly cycles. And I think and i think the tech CEOs have done a pretty good job of that. We're of course clearly seeing like Satya pull back, certainly more because they felt like they were like all in on OpenAI, and then OpenAI said we need so much more compute, and then Satya just goes, "This is just like this is kind of getting out of hand." But I do believe that the number is still extremely high, and the ROI discussion remains alive. But I do think that there is a long leash on all these businesses, because guess what? The potential is like, it's like, if AGI can create so much value, then you got to dream the dream.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, like, at least historically, thus far, it's in, like, 50% of your compute is spent on training, 50 spent on inference. In theory, I think we're going to see that, like, I mean, both are going to grow massively, but I do think you're finally going to start seeing like real like inference at scale happening uh, for like application layer. Like I'd say like ChatGPT spends a lot on inference, right? But like insert XYZ SaaS here. Do they spend a lot on inference? I think this year they're
I
going to
mean,
start.
I think agents is where, like, I think this is the year for inference, because let's think about agents, right? It's like you go in, can go kick off one agent that can go kick off 100 other agents. And guess what? All of those require compute to go
Yeah,
run. And it feels like the whole conversation about like scaling laws, all this stuff, it's like, hey, are people spending too much money on infrastructure? It feels like even if scaling laws were not true, you still have to spend so much money on infrastructure, because in order to go run these agents, you
yeah,
just need lots of data centers, and not just you need data centers, you need all of this other infrastructure in terms of like just like people to go run this stuff. So um, I completely agree. I think 2025 is going to be the year of inference finally, because it felt like 2024 everybody was talking
supposed
about
to
it,
be, but yeah,
but it was early days, right? And I think like Silicon Valley definitely has been early to things, and in terms of calling things out. But I do think that we're going to start seeing stuff in the numbers now, really.
yeah. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. But what was this? There were two questions here. The first question was
I guess
Capex.
I
I actually forgot.
so
Yep.
the second question was just in terms of DeepSeek and the amount of money that people are spending
Oh, okay.
on models, and what it seems like is that DeepSeek, at least, I mean, it's they have, so Capex is different, and then actually training the model and that amount, the whatever 6 million that they came out with, is of course a different number. But do you see the larger labs becoming more efficient going forward because of like revelations like this, or how do you think this changed the landscape, I
I
guess?
think if there is anyone that has the if there is anything or anyone that may incidentally poke a hole in the Nvidia empire, I think it may be the whale. I think it may very well be DeepSeek because like everyone says we're adding CUDA kernels, everyone says we're doing all this stuff, but I think in terms of like raw who is like actually on the frontier in terms of like who is closest to hardware software co-design, I think in the LM world it's like it's DeepSeek. Because of course they're like quant origins, right? Like quant guys like Citadel, etc. They've done this crazy stuff like reverse engineering, like the lower level language below CUDA, and like they do all this crazy stuff, right? But like none of that usually translates because they live in a different world that's than any of us do. But the deep sea guys are finally applying all of that to building great models, and I think it's and like they released a paper recently about new sparse attention methods that seem to actually outperform full attention on some things, right?
Wow.
The interesting bit here is that humans have this capacity to just like set the amount of attention they devote or allocate to just like very long context or your entire life to zero. Like I can just I can just forget something, right? If it's not relevant, I can just forget something. And like thus far, with like all of this like softmax based full attention, LLMs are still forced to give a tiny amount because of the way because of the functions that they use. They're still forced to devote a tiny amount of attention, even to completely irrelevant things, like a minuscule amount, but still you still have to spend it, right? And the whole sparse attention concept is like only a subset of all the data is ever relevant at any given point, right? And you can get crazy training like efficiency boosts and inference efficiency boosts if you can figure out what the sparse subset is, right? And I think they're doing great architectural work, and I think the fact that their architectures like outside of even sparse attention, like very sparse mixture of experts. Like when people are doing mixture of experts models, like Meta's Llama 4 is like a 16x something. It's like they're 17B like
Yeah.
experts. There's like 16, 17B experts, right? These guys are doing like 256 experts,
Yeah.
much smaller experts, right? So it's like all of this sparsity is great if you are not NVIDIA.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know. It remains to be seen if American frontier model companies, really focus because they don't
Yeah.
need to. But if they do, I think AMD stock might go up.
Yeah, but I think the big thing is that the race is alive. I think the most exciting thing is that it feels like every couple of months it's like, oh my god, OpenAI is running away with this, and then somebody comes out with something like completely different, and they're like, hey, we had this incredible revelation that we found that we're just coming out with. So the race is real, and I also want to talk about Stargate. It feels like. Uh, that's a huge number. I mean, let's talking about big numbers, right? It feels like the number is 500 billion, and how do you feel about that in terms of, I mean, I think it's abundantly clear now, at least to everyone, that of course nobody has 500 billion dollars just lying around. I think it's very much over a 4 year period we're going to figure out where to get the money from, and invest it in many. I think it's going to be invested in different ways, where some of it is going to be invested in OpenAI, some in infrastructure, all of that stuff. But how do you think about it?
I mean, I think it is a sign of the times, right? I think you're the one who told me this. Like you get three guys who think like massively. Trump,
Yeah.
Masa, and Sam. You put them in a room. You tell them like, dream the dream. They're gonna dream the biggest possible dream, the grandest possible dream. And I think, like again, like how much of the money do they have, etc. Is like all unclear. But like it's not completely outlandish. And
Yeah.
I certainly agree that. Um, It'll definitely be put to good use.
Yeah. I think I just I think I agree with you. And if anybody knows anything about Masa, I think it's the fact that he is he is somebody who loves big numbers and thinks extremely big, and isn't willing to make very high risk bets. Now, and then you think about Larry Ellison, who is effectively like in the race of all the hyperscalers, Oracle was definitely on their back foot at the beginning. I think this really puts them on the front foot to go out there and compete. And then Sam, of course, is looking for lots of capital, because guess what, in Sam's mind the only thing that matters is scaling laws, and if scaling laws are alive and well, then you need more capital, and that's really the only thing that matters. So I agree with you. I think it's a crazy amount of money. It'll probably, if we've gotten to the point where pretty much everybody believes that AI is going to create as much value, then 500 billion might not actually be a crazy number like 4 years down the line.
Yeah,
Like I think it comes back to the code, which is you severely underestimate overestimate what you can do in the short term, and underestimate what you can do in the long term. And I think like here everybody is very short term oriented, where the ROI questions on a $500 billion project are extremely severe, right? But if you think over a 5 year period, I think we've come a really long way in the last 5 years. And the big thing is you don't we don't we have I think anybody who tells you they know what's going to happen even in the next 2 years is lying to you and themselves. And I think where we're going to be in 5 years, who knows how big. Like nobody ever thought there'll be $1 trillion business, and now there are multiple of them.
yeah.
And there are multiple 2 3 billion $1 trillion businesses. So who knows how big 500 billion will be in a couple of years if this run continues. But it's definitely a sign of the times.
And I think there's another sense in which, like, even if you stopped new development, all R&D today, and you just built applications, even just like enterprise value alone, I think you could argue that you get back your 500 billion. And if you and like I think we still haven't even seen like one real like there's $1 trillion opportunity in consumer. Everyone says this, but like where has anyone come out with it? No, right? Like a meta character, like character AI maybe was onto something and then they gave up. Meta, it's like meta is meta, right? They're gonna buy the company that is the next $1 trillion consumer company. Are they gonna build it? Unclear, right? And then if
Yeah.
you even think of like for all the metaverse stuff, right? The amount of compute that you need for simulation is just massive.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the worst of all cases, you just like retrofit the
Yeah. And
right.
that's the thing. I think that's the underappreciated aspect, which is, and I think like you're stating it properly, which is the fact that people are severely underestimating the amount of infrastructure needed in order to go build and then run everything that these massive companies have sold people on, and also have very real teams working on. Like if you go to Meta and you think about the Reality Labs team, I mean these are massive teams that have been working on this stuff for a long time. If 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 any of these big projects actually start working and showing results and showing real traction, scaling up, like the worst position to be in, you have an innovative product that you can't scale up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the best example of this is Google. Their infrastructure has always been, if you, and this is the case, which is everybody just assumes Google's infrastructure works and always works and properly work and like is just out there almost working at its best efficiency. But
Yeah.
guess what? Somebody's out there building that,
Yeah.
and I think Google building the TPU is the prime example of seeing how much infrastructure you're going to need and saying
And
we're
put
going to need something very different to also just run away from Nvidia and other and any other players who are effectively going to charge us very very high margins, because guess what, we're dependent upon them. And that's why also there have been all these silicon efforts at all of these companies, because they all want to move away from Nvidia. It's of course been harder for everyone else because the software stack for Nvidia and CUDA and everything else is just built so well, and it's easy to use. But I do think that you got to give Google credit there, where they made TPUs extremely easy to use. At least that's what we've heard
Yeah,
from
and Google.
Dwarkesh and
Yeah.
others.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is like, if there is any singular like real edge that Google has, like other than the fact that they have, all the data in the world, is they've got TPUs.
Yeah. And I think that's the other thing too, which is which I don't think a lot of people are talking about, which is how much of the 500 billion or any of this capex is actually going to go into data acquisition. Because what people forget is we've scraped all the internet data, so all the data on the internet is gone. And that is of course the caveat that YouTube's data and other like other video farm and images, because of how good the video interpretation is, haven't been like fully utilized. But we've used a vast amount of the
A
internet
lot.
data. So what it comes down to is, where is the next set of data going to come from? And I mean, you go talk to any of these companies that have a core data problem, they're effectively hiring people to create more data.
Yeah.
And that's of course not a scalable way to do it. But I do believe that there are going to be large efforts to go out there and build your own chips and get your own data. And I think OpenAI actually, I think Reuters reported last week or 2 weeks back that OpenAI is in the process of building their own chip as well.
Yeah, and I'm very curious to see how that endeavor goes, and like how long before they see real results. Right? It's not like a, it's not a walk in the park,
Yeah, yeah,
but
but I think that is, I think this comes back to Tesla as well, right? Which is Tesla has always been vertically integrated. I think
yeah,
what you recognize as you grow as a company is
yeah,
just that you just have to be as vertically integrated as possible and just take over more and more parts of the stack in order to make your life easier and your business more efficient. That's the
yeah.
pretty much the only way to go.
And I think in a previous episode, actually, we talked about like the CUDA mode, and like CUDA is at the core sort of a software mode, right? And if I mean recently the NVIDIA guys were did some prompt engineering with R1 and found it to write better CUDA kernels than even many NVIDIA engineers, right? And I think that too is something that is like imminently on the minds of people who are building NVIDIA replacements in house, right? It's like
Yeah.
we
Yeah,
can
and,
just
and and
yeah,
that's the other thing, which is how big are software modes going to be if
yeah,
software is so easy to write.
yeah,
And this actually this is the best this is the best place to probably start talking about Cursor, because Cursor has, it seems like it's taken the valley by storm. Pretty much everybody I know uses Cursor or has used it. I personally was also like, wow, it seems like this is reachable and for a lot of people to just go start building stuff very easily just by prompting. So I used it as well. I know you use Cursor. How do you feel about it? What's your experience been, and what have you heard from other developers around you?
I like it a lot. There was actually this, I think last year there was this wait 9 month period in which I would ask people, have you used Cursor? And they'd say no. And I'd recommend it to them. But I actually hadn't used Cursor at all myself. And like, maybe like 3 months ago, I like actually started using it in like I still don't use it nearly as much as other people do. Like I use it mostly as like most of my work is like I'll talk to Claude. Like so the general paranoia that I have with a lot of these coding systems is that you don't really have control over, like, you don't have as much control over how the systems are prompted and like scaffolded in the background as you would like. And so that can very easily get in the way. Like they have this functionality that you can just add the code base and it'll like find the relevant context and put it in, and this like fails a non-trivial amount, right? Like these are intractable problems, right? But like there's a sense in which like I think you do, like, we are going to be moved, like, it is unclear, right? This whole thing is like, it's unclear if Claude needs Cursor more or if Cursor needs Claude more, right? Because like all of these coding agents in the last like 6 months we've seen sort of taken off. It's all because like Claude 3.5 Sonnet is just like this incredible model for coding, right? And the question is like, who commoditizes who?
Yeah. And I think it comes back to, and I think most of the large labs have talked about how they're not going to go out there and like build these application focused platforms, and there are going to be effectively wrapper companies on top of them. Now, like you mentioned, there's Cursor, there are a bunch of others that have have honestly gotten lots of attention, lots of developer love. But I do agree with you. I think what it seems like is that, I mean, I would be extremely interested to know, for all the people who use Cursor, for all the revenue that Cursor has, what percentage of it actually just goes straight to Anthropic because of
Mm.
how much they have to use the model for, even for the paid users. It's like, hey, if people are just using this thing all day long, every day, truly as a co-pilot, they're probably burning through a lot of GPUs
Yeah.
and a lot of compute.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a fair point. I think one of the smartest things they did, I think, recently is they bought. There's another company called Super Maven that was building like a tab complete model, like initially a completion model, and then they raised money to go build an IDE, and I guess they realized like Cursor's already doing that in some sense, and they merged teams, and those guys, I like, ex OpenAI guys, like they're pretty sharp guys, and I think the way this works perhaps in the end is like Cursor collects enough data that they build like pretty good coding models, and like the rest they distill from people in production just using, whatever the SOTA frontier model is, and they just distill from usage.
Yeah. And I guess here's a broader question, which is, I think the bull case for these is that Cursor makes everyone a developer, and effectively, even
Yeah,
people who are.
yeah.
Hmm?
It just grows the TAM of like software in general.
Exactly. Like if everybody knows that the software engineering time is huge, because guess what? This is high quality, high value knowledge work. But guess what? If you could just incrementally make the TAM bigger by making everybody a developer and just like effectively writing in English and starting to build applications, like very real applications, where does the world go there? I think that is the vision that people are chasing. I think it's like this whole thing of, oh, like, can Cursor help incrementally or to complete some like Google, like Meta, any of
Yeah,
these companies code is okay. But I
yeah,
think the broader vision is very much what the Replit vision is.
yeah.
Very
Or the Devon vision, frankly, I think
yeah.
the crazy thing about this is like sometimes you jump the gun, and then you sort of like open people's minds to the possibilities, and then someone else executes that vision better than you can.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But I also, everybody's taking like a different approach to this as well, right? It's like, that is, one is the prompting approach, and then there is also like, okay, do you just want like effectively software engineering agents that you can just like Slack to and say, hey, just go do X and do Y, and they'll just like actually go and put stuff in production and just start running stuff. So I'm very curious to see where all of these IDEs and software engineering agents go. But I do think that, given developers are most comfortable, pretty technical a lot of the time, they're definitely going to be the first users, and we're going to see, like, it seems like if agents are going to pick up,
Coding
it's
first. Yeah.
coding is going to be up there in terms of the number of agents that are getting used
I
there.
think the one question I do have about a lot of this is like Sam says, O1 Pro or something was able to do something that would have taken a lawyer, like something that you would have paid a lawyer like $5,000 to do in like 10 minutes or something. Uh, and like you can make an analogous case for coding is like something that I would have paid a guy like 100 grand to do. Like, it's like zero shot it or whatever, right? Which is great, but then it's like you're not. It's like, are you actually getting $100,000 worth of work for $100, or does the value of the work now go down, right? So which is like the sort of existential question. There's like the actual the margins just collapse, right? And
Yeah,
what happens then? But I think
yeah.
we do have a little bit of time, I think, before.
Yeah, I think we have a little bit of time, and also incrementally, it also comes back to, if people can, like, let's just say you're some person who wants to start a business, or and I think like Wix and others said, hey, you can make websites easily, but guess what? If you can make apps and websites and pretty much everything more easily, it is true that the value of software engineering goes down, but then along with that, the number of people who can create stuff goes up. So
Mm.
so it comes back to, and I thought Satya's point was very interesting, where he talks about that oh, everybody's talking about these ROI questions, but what we need to talk about is GDP growth. Like,
Mm.
if
Value create, like it's like maybe it's unclear if you'll have like massive like $1 trillion companies, right? Because that's fundamentally a function of how much value these companies manage to capture.
yeah,
But it's plausible that you create a massive amount of value that just like goes into GDP, right?
yeah.
It grows
And
it.
I don't think, and I think the interesting thing is, like, in the, like, at least the last platform shift, which was the cloud, there was never the question of, can we grow GDP 10% with the cloud? And I think it was, hey, we can like make things incrementally better, and there are massive opportunities here. But I at least I haven't read, and I've done a bunch of work on what the last era might have looked like and what the growth looked like there. I do think with the internet and with mobile, there was very much a belief that this can change the course of humanity, and it very much did. But I do think that it's like the opportunities like these don't come in 10, 20 years. And if the fact that we're even discussing developed GDPs growing 10% is it feels like that hasn't been a more exciting time, especially given everything from software engineering uh, to artistic work. Everything
Yeah.
can effectively go get created, and people can add value everywhere and effectively automate all of these tasks.
Yeah.
I think that's a great place to stop. This was a great discussion. Next week we'll be back with a special guest, so stay tuned. Thank you.